Welcome back, 8th grade learners. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for today's explainer, because we are going to look at poetry in a completely new way. You know, we usually just think of poems as pretty words sitting on a page. But today, we're looking at poetry as architecture. We're going to decode the actual structural blueprints that poets use to build these incredible works of art, layer by layer, word by word. Because as you'll see, it's not just about what they say, it's absolutely about how they construct it. Let's get right into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll hit the power of poetry, blueprints of poetic form, a deep dive into the haiku, how form shapes meaning, and finally, education rooted in morality. Okay, let's dive into this first section.
Section 1. The Power of Poetry, Building a Godly Foundation.
Before we get into the nuts and bolts of how a poem is built, the source material sets up a core foundation. Think about it. The words we use are our raw materials, right? They're the literal bricks and mortar we use to interact with the world. While Psalm 19:14 says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer." Poetry is this incredibly concentrated, powerful tool for sharing complex ideas. But the HeroesmartAcademy curriculum reminds us that at its core, these materials we choose to build with should reflect a godly foundation. Understanding how words are structured actually helps ensure that what we create is truly meaningful and acceptable.
So how do poets actually organize all those words? Well, they use something called poetic form. Basically, poetic form is the specific shape, length, rhythm, and rules a poet chooses to organize their ideas. Think of it exactly like a master builder constructing a house. You wouldn't just grab a bunch of wood and drywall and start throwing it together haphazardly. If a builder ignores the blueprint, the house is going to collapse. It's the exact same thing for a poet. A poem without a deliberate form can just cave in under the weight of its own heavy emotions. That foundational choice completely shapes how we experience the poem when we, the readers, step inside.
Moving on to Section 2, Blueprints of Poetic Form, Fixed versus Free.
Let's check out the different framing options our poet builders have. When a poet sits down, they generally have to pick between two major blueprints, fixed forms and free verse. Fixed forms, like sonnets, are your traditional houses with thick, load-bearing walls. They've got strict rules about line length, meter, and rhyme. They're built like the perfectly spaced columns of an ancient temple. Having exactly 14 lines in a sonnet lets you build a really complex, rigid argument. On the flip side, we have free verse. Now this offers way more flexibility. There's no set rhythm or rhyme, but don't be fooled. It's kind of like carefully balancing smooth river stones in a garden. It looks totally natural, but it still requires immense skill and incredibly precise word choice so the whole thing doesn't just topple over.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how many blueprints a poet has at their disposal. First up, the epic. These are your grand, heroic tales, like the Odyssey. Then you have the ballad, which is perfect for dramatic or romantic stories delivered in bouncy, song-like stanzas. Narrative poems, as you might guess, just tell a clear story from start to finish. And finally, lyric poems. These are much softer. They focus entirely on capturing a single emotion or a vivid scene. Knowing whether you're walking into the massive, echoing halls of an epic or the quiet, tiny room of a lyric poem changes your entire expectation before you even read a single word.
Section 3. Deep Dive, the Haiku, a Model Home.
Okay, we're going to zoom all the way in on one specific, highly structured fixed form to see this architecture in action. Think of this as stepping into our beautifully crafted model home. Listen carefully to the pacing of this traditional Japanese haiku. An old, silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash. Silence again. Did you catch how that works? You have that deliberate, pregnant pause right at the dash, and then boom, that incredible onomatopoeic word splash completely wakes up your ears right in the middle of all that quiet.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the math behind what you just heard, 5-7-5. That is the strict syllable constraint of the traditional haiku. 5 syllables in the first line, 7 in the second, 5 in the third. It is so tight. I mean, think about trying to pack everything you own for a month-long trip into a tiny little carry-on bag. Because the space is so remarkably small, it forces absolute precision. Every single syllable literally has to earn its place in the blueprint, or it gets cut.
Let's walk through how this builds a narrative arc, step by step. First, the silent pond gives us pure stillness. Second, the frog jumps. That's a burst of sudden motion. Third, splash, a sharp sound. And finally, silence again, where we return right back to stillness. The architecture here is just genius. It actually lets you physically feel the passage of time. You genuinely experience the calm, the sudden jolt of an interruption, and then you feel the whole scene completely rebalance itself. So let's look under the hood at the mechanics that make this work. Traditional haikus rely on a few key elements. They focus on nature, often using a seasonal hint called a kigo. They also feature a cutting moment. Imagine taking a sharp pair of scissors and slicing the poem right in half to create a sudden shift or contrast. In our poem, that little dash acts like a tiny drum roll that heightens the tension. They use onomatopoeia, sound effects to break the quiet. But the most powerful element? Brevity. It captures one tiny, brief disturbance inside a massive, enduring calm.
Section 4. How Form Shapes Meaning. The Poet's Purpose.
Let's talk about the poet's real purpose here. Because of that strict 5-7-5 rule we just looked at, the poet literally doesn't have the space to write a giant paragraph explaining how surprised they were by the frog. Instead, the poet shows rather than tells. That strict form acts exactly like a tightly focused spotlight in a pitch-black room. It forces the poet to illuminate just one vivid, beautiful detail. They build an unforgettable sensory image that we get to watch unfold, rather than just reading a summary of it. When you understand the form, you instantly unlock the poet's purpose.
Finally, Section 5. Education Rooted in Morality. The Capstone.
This brings us to the capstone of our build today. We've spent time decoding poetic structures, becoming sharper readers. But the core philosophy of the Heroes Smart Academy Godly Learners series poses a crucial question. What is the point of being smart and supposedly educated if you continue to make bad choices that hurt? The curriculum argues that education without morality is actively dangerous. Just like a perfectly structured poem can still convey something toxic, the source material suggests that a razor-sharp mind without a strong moral compass is essentially a grand house built on sand.
And that's exactly why the source material intertwines biblical morality with this education. It highlights Romans 8:6-7, which promises peace of mind to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. The idea here is that just as the strict discipline of a poetic form creates a lasting piece of art, the discipline of keeping your mind spiritual creates something beautiful in the real world, actual peace of mind. That's the ultimate goal the curriculum has for its learners.
So here's what I want to leave you with today. We've seen how master poets carefully select their blueprints, whether it's a sonnet, a haiku, or free verse, to shape their words and impact the world. But you know what? You are the architect of your own learning and your own life. So what blueprint are you choosing for your own mind? Are you building a fragile structure of just facts? Or are you framing your education with a strong, unshakable foundation? Definitely something to chew on as you go about your day. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep building wisely.